Alright, let's see if you guys can hear me talk. Yay! Okay. So there's a pretty considerable audio delay on it, but that's okay. This is why I partially prefer Twitch over YouTube streaming, but you know, we'll do with what we got. So, welcome. It looks like I have four of you in today, maybe five. I don't know. Sylvan's typing right now. I can't really tell. Yes, Sylvan. It's about stairs and the Mayan culture. Yeah, that's totally what we're here to do is learn about Mayans and their wonderful history. For those of you who are watching this video, it's 9 o'clock, and we're gonna get the stream started now. So we have Discord chat open right now, which is where most of the chatter is coming from. So if I'm speaking to random people and voices, then you'll know that's because we're talking in Discord. I'm not just talking to my multiple personalities, just so you know. Okay, so it looks like we've got Squishy, Frost, maybe Sylvan, Garden, and Silent. Alright, guys. I am going to get started with the Maya portion. Um, Welcome for anyone who's watching. These little classes are meant to kind of give a brief introduction to modeling in Maya, the process, the pipeline, everything to do with creating assets in Maya. We're going to be going over a lot of different stuff over the course of all of these classes, ranging from basic modeling. Today's course is going to be Introduction to Maya itself. We're going to be going over high polygon modeling, how to create low polygon shells, UVing, texture processes, a lot of different stuff that we'll be covering in Maya, at least to get you comfortable enough to create art assets. The big interest has been obviously with Project Sanzar. People have been wanting to import assets into the project itself. So this is kind of a way to bring people a little bit up to speed with Maya. If you have general modeling knowledge already, some of these things are going to seem a little easier to you. If you don't have modeling knowledge, it's okay. It takes a little bit of time to learn. Um, and Maya can be a little jarring at first. That's why today we're focusing mostly just on introducing you to Maya itself. So with that being said, you can see Maya on my screen. There's a lot of stuff here. Mine might appear a little differently than yours. A couple of my interface things have been tweaked as far as my own personal preference. Um, that's okay. Um, most of what you see should be relatively the same. So let's get started. There's going to be a lot of jumping around, and I'll try and answer questions as much as I can while we're doing the stream and everything, because I know there will probably be a lot. Uh, yes, silent. There's a lot of buttons in here. There's a lot of things everywhere in Maya. Still not as bad as the ZBrush interface, in my opinion, but you know, do what we can. So we'll get started. I'm actually going to close out these side tool windows for now. So we just have the main viewport. So what you're looking at right now, this wonderful little grid that you're spinning around, this is the 3D perspective view of Maya. This is your main window for where most of the modeling and everything is going to take place. This little guy over to the right here, this is called your view cube, and you can actually change your pivot based on that. But we'll get more into the view cube later. So how I'm spinning around right now, how to actually navigate your 3D viewport is using the Alt button. If you hold down Alt, and if you left click, this allows you to rotate around your view. Middle mouse button allows you to drag in your viewport, and then right allows you to zoom in and out in your viewport. So again, left click to rotate, middle to move, and right to zoom. These are like the three core things that are really going to help. Obviously, moving around in your viewport is a huge thing. It's relatively important. Let's see, pop open Discord, see if there's any questions. Yeah, so Silent makes a point that things in here are a lot different than Blender. Things in Maya are very, very different than Blender. Again, you can apply a lot of the core basics of modeling and stuff to what we're talking about here, but getting around in Maya is a little kind of jarring at first. Blender has a really, really simple interface, makes things a lot easier to work around in. But we'll get there. There's plenty of stuff we'll go over, so hopefully you guys will be as comfortable with Maya, at least the interface by the end of today. And I will try and not go as fast, but you know, I have a tendency to do that. So this is, again, this is your main perspective viewport. If you go into this little panels drop down menu in your viewport, you'll see that you actually can change this. So perspective, and this is your main perspective, and we'll go into creating new ones. Before we do any of that, that's down the road, I'm going to show you guys. This is perspective with your orthographic views. So these different views, I'll actually show you. Here, if I create something really quick that just gives you an idea of where we're at perspective-wise. So this, again, this is your main perspective, the one that I'm twirling around in right now. That's your 3D view. We go over to the left of that, we have the top view. This is always going to be locked in like this. You can't actually rotate around in this, so and it tells you orthographic views cannot be rotated, but you can still zoom around and middle mouse move around the object. And then you have your front perspective, and then you have right, or if you want left perspective, depending on what you want there. So And that's changed in the view cube, and I'll go over that in just a second. But I want to introduce you guys to the main core for Windows before we do anything. Yeah, Sylvan, we'll hit hotkeys and stuff more down the road. Um, we'll get towards hotkeys and stuff later. Most of what I want to introduce first and off the bat is basics, and then we'll get into more detail stuff later. Okay, so so we introduced you guys to the four basic windows, your perspective and your orthographic views. I'm gonna pop open my main perspective window more, and I'm actually gonna do this by hitting spacebar in the window. So if you're rolled over, you're like your mouse is actually in the window itself, and you hit spacebar, you're gonna be able to maximize the window back out, and then spacebar brings you back out. If you click in to like another window, hit spacebar, um, it maximizes that viewport. So we're gonna keep open our perspective 3D viewport for right now. Yes, yeah, Sylvan, I do most of the time work in four screen mode. It's easier to model that way when you have perspective, especially when you're doing models from reference. But for the sake of, I think most of what we'll be doing today is going to be in mainly perspective. That way, we can kind of address most of the windows and stuff without too much clutter around everywhere. So I'm going to introduce you guys to the main functions up here in your perspective windows. The things that are really going to matter. There's plenty of other stuff, and I don't want to overly bombard you guys because a lot of the stuff you're not going to use right now. That's okay. So the things that we're gonna go over is these little boxes that you see in these little shaded windows over here. So you're by default you're in wireframe mode, which only shows you obviously your wireframe. And then you have actually shaded mode, which gives you your object, and then you have hidden line mode, which shows you your wireframe on your objects even when it's not selected. So you see when it's unselected, you get the wireframe. And then we have shaded, textured shaded, which is not going to do anything for us right now because we don't have any textures aligned to this object. That's fine. And then, of course, we have lights, which, again, this won't do anything for you right now because there's no lights in the scenes. Then you have shadows. And then you have your viewport detail mode. This is something we're going to go over way later in the process of Maya. You're sticking to basic viewport renderer right now because it's all you need. Once we get into actually texturing things and we have normals and speculars, then we'll get into using the different renderers. But for now, that's where it is. It doesn't do much to worry about it as it is. So the other things, we're going to look into this window. I'm actually going to create just a couple of little things. And don't worry, we're going to get into creating this stuff. I'm just doing this for the sake of introducing you guys. So don't worry about actually creating the assets or anything yet. This next little button I'm going to show you guys is the isolate select button. And this little guy up in your window, it's a little green box with an arrow in it, actually just allows you to only show one object that you have selected. You can do this with faces, you can do it with multiple objects, but it allows you to keep like working on a particular thing without having the clutter of everything else around it. This next little dude is your X-ray mode. That's to the right of the isolate mode. And X-ray allows you essentially just to see through objects without it being fully transparent. I.e., so like if you're in wireframe, you can still see through objects, but you can't really see their shaded perspective. So X-ray just allows you kind of that ability, which is nice. This some of this other stuff right now on this menu is not going to be too important for you. But really quickly, this is your camera settings is over here, and I mentioned earlier that you can create more cameras, and this is where you would find the camera settings. But we're not going to go into that because there's no need for you to mess around with cameras yet. That's like an extensive thing that we'll kind of break into eventually. Maybe if it's really important. I almost never use my camera settings, but whatever. Okay, so with that, there's two other things on the menu. One of these that I've mentioned already, which is the view cube, and this other thing to the left is your polygon try UV count. If neither of these are showing, that's okay. We're going to show you how to do that now. So if you go up in your bar over here and you go up to your display and you go up to your heads up display, it's one of the drop down selections. It's the second one down from display. There's a lot of these different little things that you can turn on for your heads up display. I'm actually going to turn on my view axis too. So I have right now, I have poly count, I have view axis, and I have view cube turned on. These three things are really the only ones that I ever turn on. Sometimes I'll turn on object details, but uh, it's not one of those things that's really particularly important. So I'm going to turn that back off. It's not really all that essential, but these three things are relatively essential. This is here's your little axis origin popped up in the bottom left hand corner after I turned it on. So in the top left hand corner, again, this the details menu just essentially shows you details about the selected objects you have. So right now I have an object that's 400 faces, which is 760 tries, 382 verts, blah blah. Just it's extraneous detail, and it'll show you. So I have all three selected now. It'll show you the poly count, the try count for all three of those. Obviously, managing your polygon counts is important. So I always have that up unless I'm taking screenshots, so that I'm always constantly aware. And I try and keep my poly budgets under a certain amount. So if I start seeing it go over, I'll take out some details or whatever. Okay, so we'll go over to this view cube now. We talked about this a couple of times. This is just essentially a little gadget that allows you to rotate or snap rotate. So in 3D perspective, we can snap rotate to the back, the right, the top, rotate it left or right. So if we wanted just a different angle on pulling some verts or modeling, and then of course just our basic home, which allows you to snap back to the origin point. It's the same with all the different views. Clicking the arrows allows you to spin the tumbler around, which changes your perspective in each of the windows. Again, you can rotate these left or right. This really helpful for when you're just doing quick snap modeling and stuff. I don't use the view cube a ton when I'm doing a lot of modeling in 3D perspective, but I use it a lot when I'm doing modeling in some of the orthographic perspectives. It's just a little easier when you're in 3D perspective to use the keys rather than going over and working around with the view cube, but that's personal preference. Everyone's a little different in there, so whatever works for you. Let's see, nothing in Discord. Okay, that's good. All right, so at the top of Maya, you have most of your menu options. File, pretty self-explanatory there. Edit has a lot of different tools in there. Modify, we'll go into all these tools and stuff, but these are most of your relative to polygon modeling tools are up here. And this actually changes according to what drop-down tab you have, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But your window settings is what I'm going to call attention to now, which is a lot of your layout stuff. we won't go too far into this because a lot of this is kind of just customization stuff. But your editors and stuff are in here, but your settings and preferences is in here too. And settings and preferences is important. This is something you can mess around with if you feel comfortable enough to look around in your settings. I wouldn't recommend it. I would keep it at default for now. Most of mine set to default right now. I had a lot of custom preferences in there, but there's a lot of important things in your window that we'll kind of go over later on. So you'll see in here we've got mesh, edit mesh, normals, UVs, muscle, pipeline cache, and content tools. None of that stuff is stuff we're going to worry about. But now I'm going to show you guys there's a little drop down menu right below file and edit that shows animation, polygon, surfaces, dynamics, rendering, and dynamics. At no point are we going to cover rendering and dynamics or dynamics. All of those are other elements. There are elements I never use personally when I'm modeling, so I don't really see a reason for us to go over any of it. But animation, polygons, and surfaces, these three tabs are pretty much where I stay. I don't think we're going to be going into any animation stuff. To be honest, it's been a really long time since I've done any animation, so I'm probably not the best there. But so let's click on animation, and you'll notice that a lot of this menu, this top bar actually changed. And so we've kind of got all these different menus that are drop down relative to animation. So this tab, this drop down essentially controls kind of which editing perspective you're in for Maya. Surface is a little different, so we have even more options for surfaces. But for the most part, primarily at least for the beginning of us working in Maya, we're going to be sticking towards editing and polygons. So keep that drop down to polygons. If you ever look at your menu and see that it's a little different than my menu, like it has like edit NURBS or edit surfaces, change that drop down back to polygons. That's probably the issue. So the next thing we're gonna look over is actually these little tabs. This is called your shelf. The shelf is the most helpful thing in Maya. Your shelf is going to look a little differently than my shelf. My shelf has been customized after a certain point, so I want to say after this little. I think this is one of my UV window. Yeah, UV texture editor window. I think your shelf will probably end there, and then all the buttons to the right of it don't exist. And of course, I'm narrating this with my finger on my screen, like you can see what I'm doing, but you can't. So stop doing that. All of these buttons to the right are custom buttons, but all these buttons to the left should be default ones that you see already. So these different tabs, much like this drop down, change what kind of stuff we're working on. So you go in, there's a tab for curves, surfaces, polygons, deformation, animation, all these different ones. None of these to the far right are going to matter. And here for fluids, muscle, tune, paint effects, rendering, dynamics. None of that stuff is stuff we're going to use. But these are essentially just shortcuts to the drop-down tools. So you see like cut faces. So we're in polygons, and if I go to polygons and I drop down, this cut faces tool is somewhere in my menu, or my interactive split tool. That's my interactive split tool. These are little shortcuts instead of doing the drop down menu. And this shelf, like I said, is completely customizable. So obviously I have a bunch of buttons that I've added in to help click faster which ones I use more frequently in Maya, and this is something like you'll realize over time like what buttons you particularly use. So, like for instance, like the insert edge loop tool. If you're doing any high polygon work, you're going to be using the insert edge loop tool constantly. So I always have mine up on my bar. I don't think by default it is up on the bar, but so like if I click on it, um, now I have my ability to insert edge loops, and instead of going into um, edit mesh, insert edge loop tool, um, I have a shortcut for it, which is nice. Um, but we'll get into customizing interface stuff later. I'm not going to go into it today because there's different ways you can customize your interface. You can actually do it through scripting. You can do it through shortcuts, adding it to your bar. Lots of different ways to do it. But the easiest way, the way I just did it, if you do Control Shift Click on anything in the menu, so if you were to do Control Shift Click Cut Faces tool, you'll notice that I added a new button over to the right of it. Don't add stuff to your bar yet. I would hold off on doing that because you'll start finding as you go through modeling and everything what tools you use more frequently, and obviously there's limited space on the bar. However, if you add more buttons than your max from left to right, it'll go down into a second shelf, and all you have to do is click the arrow down. But to me, that's the same amount of work, so I try and keep my shelf always single lined. And then, of course, you can edit this shelf. Let's see, where's my shelf editor? Shelf editor. Sorry, sometimes I'll forget where my menus are, but that's okay. I forget things. This shelf editor, again, we're not going to go too comprehensively into this. This is actually where you would edit all of these items that you've added into your shelf. So right now we have the polygon shelf selected, and then the shelf contents on the right shows you this last thing that I clicked was merge. This is all the way on the far right over here. These are all the different tools, and I can actually just trash that if I don't want it. So again, this is something that you'll figure out over time. So don't worry too extensively about adding things into your shelf right now. More introduction stuff. There's plenty of introduction stuff to go. Okay, so I'm actually gonna undo that. The next thing we're gonna go over is this bar over to the left. This bar is where most of your common tool stuff is found. So if I have an object selected, key command wise, I guess I should probably introduce you to that. Q is for selecting, W is for translating, E is for rotating, and R is for scaling. These, as you'll notice, as I'm pressing Q, W, E, and R over here, is changing to different ones. These are the tool settings, and this is clicking, this is your move tool, this is your rotate, and this is your scale. So if you ever forget the key commands, the buttons are over here to your left. Then below that, we have our different panels. So if you click this one that's just a grid, that's just your 3D perspective, and that's the maximized window of that. If you click the one right below it, we have the 3D perspective and the orthographic views set up. If you click the one below that, we'll have the 3D perspective lined next to the outliner. We'll talk about the outliner in a little bit. I won't go too much into it now. And then these other wonderful things for animation, for rendering particles, dynamics, crap like that. Don't worry about any of it. those are menus that are not going to matter for anything we're going to go through. So the last thing on that is really just the perspective in the outliner. And I'm going to leave that. I'm actually, you know what? I'll go back to fully maximize 3D perspective because we're going to click on um, some side windows that we don't have, and these are actually going to scale down this window a little bit. So if you go over to the right, there's 3 little tool settings over here, and then the first one we're going to look at is going to be your tool settings, which is the middle one. So if you click on it and to show and hide tool settings, this window to the left of your 3D perspective will pop up. You can also do this usually by double clicking, but it doesn't seem to be working right now. So tool settings, obviously right now I have just my select popped up right now, and there's different settings in here for selecting objects. A lot of this stuff we'll get into when we start modeling, but I want you to be familiar with where the tool settings and stuff are. So if you go down, here's all your settings for your moving objects. You can change the axis in which you're moving things, how it moves, whether locally, by world standards, or by the object. A lot of different settings there, more of which we'll go over when we start modeling. A lot of this stuff isn't going to matter. Joint crap, don't worry about it. But there is stuff down here that we'll briefly go over too, like in soft selection. Rotate settings, same thing. You see mine's actually set to discrete rotate, which actually snaps it on its rotation. I always have mine set to like 15 degrees unless I need something like really loosely rotated. But here's all your different rotate settings. Here's all your different scale settings. Pretty easy, straightforward. And we'll get into the nitty gritty with those as we start modeling. So not a whole lot's gonna happen there today. The next thing I'm gonna pop open is the attribute editor, and this pops open on the right. So now if you look at your menu, you should have tool settings, you should have your 3D perspective up, and then you should have the attribute editor. The attribute editor is where your history of objects sits. So as you're modeling and you start adding different modifications to each of the objects, stuff will start popping up in here. So you'll notice now my poly split just showed up, or let's say I went and beveled it. My poly bevel, my poly split ring, they're now part of the history in here, and so they can be edited accordingly. Which is nice. I probably just crashed Maya, didn't I? I think I did. Stand by. Nope. Nah, we didn't crash Maya. That's good. Don't mess around with things in Maya. It will get angry at you and probably crash. Okay. Hold on. Let me pop up in Discord, see if there's anything going on. Nope. Nothing in Discord. Everyone doing good so far? Sylvan is typing. If there's a brief lull in voice, it's because I'm watching people type. Yeah, Sylvan, there are autosave settings. I'll pop that open when we start modeling, because I'll talk about the wonderful world of crashing that Maya occurs when you're modeling. But remind me when we start doing the modeling portion. That's fine, Frost. The video will be up there, so you can refer back to it at any point. Okay, So back to our attribute editor, you'll notice, so like if we select this polycylinder, um, the original state of the polycylinder is up here in the attribute editor, so we can actually go in and change its subdivision axes, height, caps, etc. This always exists in the attribute editor until you delete the history. But if you do change these after you make modifications, so like in this case, if I were to change something in here, sometimes it'll completely wreck the object. It actually seems to be responding well right now, which is really weird. That almost never happens. Um, but changing the polygon division levels on the original object after you've done modifications is usually complicated, but it is still always in here. Again, until you freeze history or delete history, and then of course it's gone. And we'll go over deleting history and freezing transformations and all that crap when we start modeling. The last of those three tools in here is the channel box. You'll notice that actually replaces the attribute editor. So those two overlap each other, but there is a way to break each other off from one another. I'll show you that in just a second. So channel box and layer editor, this is just another place for kind of the information on some of your stuff. So your translation, your rotate, and your scale, your parameters will always be in here on like how much you've done for each one of those. So if you ever need to like rotate or translate in specific amounts, this is where you would find it. And all of the information again is going to be stored here. So see, as I'm rotating this object, it's changing the values. Let's say I scale it. So now there's all this information in here as far as its translation, rotation, and scale. This stuff will always be here until you freeze transformations. Freezing transformations is something we'll go over again in modeling, so don't worry too much about it right now. I just needed to show you guys where all of these parameters are. And now you'll notice that it went back to 0 and I'm modifying it again and the values are changing again. So you can also pull down your information on the original state of the object for the same kind of values that you were doing in the attribute editor, which is how many divisions it has and its different axes and everything. It's just another spot for you to pull that up. The last thing in here is the layers. We'll work with layers a little bit towards when we're doing high polygon, low polygon modeling and everything, so that you can see how it kind of plays out to be a little more helpful when you have multiple objects and in a scene file. But this one with the little star on it, create a new layer, allows you to create your multiple layers and everything. And if you have objects selected, you can create a layer with objects selected, and that's the one on the far right of it. And change its visibility with this little V over here. So if you click that on and off, that's showing, bringing it back up to visibility. There are different things you can do with them in here. So the reference mode, you can't select them. Basic mode, and then you have transparent mode, which basically just keeps the wireframe, but you can't actually select them. Kind of helpful sometimes when you're working with a lot of different objects. Let's see. Pop it on Discord real quick. Garden, yeah, your UI is going to be a little different. It depends on which parts of your UI are different. I'm not sure how different they are. It also might be a little different because I believe some of you guys are in 2016. So some of the stuff might be even more different. If you are in 2015 or 2016 and there are some UI changes, just let me know if you can't find them or whatever. and we'll figure out the difference. Or if anyone watching this is missing things, they can't find them, just message me on Discord or Slack, whichever works easier for you. Let's see. Okay, so we went through the different menus and stuff over here, your attribute editors. We went through your tool setting placement over here. That's always important. I guess we will pop open the outliner. We briefly mentioned this earlier. Outliner. I keep mine open every now and then when I have like a laundry list of objects or when I go to start naming objects. This essentially shows you the assets in your scene. So you'll see these 4 grayed out ones are our cameras. They're always our default cameras: perspective, top, front, side. And then we have our torus, cylinder, and sphere over here. And so these 3 objects exist in the scene. And you'll notice that even though we've locked those other assets in the layer, we can still select it via the outliner. And then of course you've got your default sets, but that's not important. So the outliner just shows you essentially how your objects are, and when we actually get into like grouping and everything, it'll show you group chains, which is helpful when you've got a lot of assets to manage. But we won't go into grouping and stuff yet. It's not that big of a deal. Oh man, that's it's a bummer that 2016 is so different. I'm gonna have to check out 2016 at some point and see if we can upgrade to it. Even though I don't want to, I don't like upgrading. It changes things for me, and then I don't like changing my workflow. But I'll take a look at it and see what's different. Yeah, and again, just if you're missing something, just message me. We'll figure it out. Okay. So again, quick recap. You have your attribute editor, tool settings, layer management. You've got main perspective, your perspective in orthographic views, your perspective in outliner. You've got your drop down for your different tool settings in here, your shelf, which shows you your quick key commands, your main window stuff up here. Again, all this stuff up here, we'll get into what some of this stuff does as we progress through modeling and everything in Maya. The next thing I'm going to show you guys, as far as important things go, is your UV editor, which you'll find under Window, UV Texture Editor. This is an important thing that exists in Maya, and we'll get very familiar with our UV window at a later date. But I just wanted you guys to be familiar with the UV window itself. For anyone who has modeled, UV editing is essentially the same everywhere you go. It's a pain in the ass, but it's easy to do. There's a lot of tools in the UV window that we'll go over. Nothing that we'll get into the details of now. But like if I have this object selected, you'll see this basic UVs that are already laid out for us. Everything comes with default UVs. Doesn't necessarily mean they're correct, but in this case, since we haven't really done much modification to this object, its default UV set is actually pretty accurate, except a little stretched, I think, on certain parameters. But this is your UV window. This is important. I actually run a custom UV program in my Maya personally. I don't know if this is going to work for 2016 or not. I'll have to investigate to see if it does. This is a pretty commonly used UV program system. It's actually a two different mods. One that replaces the UV window, and one that actually adds on a secondary shelf to it. Uh, we may or may not get into adding modifications into Maya. If we do, it'll be for the purposes of adding in this UV system, because without this UV addition, my life is a lot difficult. Sorry. So if I can get it to you guys for 2016, then it would be helpful. Oh, let's pull up this Gyazo screenshot. Oh, dear God. Hmm. Most of what I'm seeing is relatively close to 2014. Um, except, oh, wow, God, wow, 2016 is a lot. I don't like the new buttons. The new buttons are weird. Ew, why do you have to change things, Autodesk? Ugh. Well, that does indeed complicate life a little bit, but if you roll over Ancient, yeah, that's true. It is light too, so I don't know what the difference between light and full program are, what they've taken out. I imagine anything that we're talking about now is really basic stuff and core functions, so I can't imagine any of it would be taken out. It should be there somewhere. So like when I'm looking at like the left hand, uh, I'm still seeing that there's like the main perspective and orthographics, outliner. If I look at the top right, I'm still seeing the buttons for attribute editor, tool settings, and layer management. Um, ugh, wow, that's really gonna make things difficult. Thanks, Ancient. Way to ruin my day. Apparently, things are very different between 2016 and 2014. So that should be really interesting. Um, but again, a lot of this stuff I think we're dealing with is very core function, so we should still be okay. And at least for today, in the introduction to Maya itself, most of what I've talked about is right and it's still in the same place. I'm still seeing it in the 2016 version um, as standard default. Again, like the things that I mentioned are going to be a little different. Like the shelf editor is going to be a little different between me and you because I have a custom shelf editor. I've added things to my shelf. So, in looking at the screenshot Garden provided of 2016, there most of what I'm seeing is still pretty in there. Like your perspective window menu, um, I'm still showing like your shaded and your textured mode. Still showing your isolate buttons, your camera settings. There's a few more settings in there that don't particularly matter. I'm still seeing X-ray mode, so most of that's still there, which is good. If ViewCube isn't showing for you, that's weird. I do not have an answer for that one. That one is beyond my power. Uh, I'll investigate that though and see why ViewCube wouldn't be showing up for you guys. I don't know if that's an LT thing or a 2016 thing. Um, for those watching this video, when I refer to LT, it's Maya Lite, which a lot of our contractors have picked up to learn a little bit of Maya. So if you're listening to this and you have regular Maya, some of this stuff might be a little different for you. That's okay. That's what I'm here for, and to answer questions and stuff. So yeah, Garden. Looking at it, most of what we've talked about is still there. So I think you're still okay. Uh, the only thing I really don't see, yeah, is the view cube, but I still see all your tool settings and tool parameters, your attribute editor and everything. So I think you're still doing fine. But yeah, the buttons look really weird, and I don't like it. I'm gonna be butthurt about the buttons for a while. Maybe those are just LT buttons. I hope so. Yeah, we'll figure out the VCube thing. Okay. So we don't have a lot of time left. And I am really thirsty. But I think one of the last things we're gonna look over, is the hypershade. This is another one of those things that I want to call attention to earlier on. This is a really important window for Maya. Let's see if did all you guys find the hypershade window? Still in the same spot, right? Still good. Someone answer me. No? No one? I think every one of my contractors just disappeared suddenly. I'm going to keep going then. That's fine. This hypershade window, like I said, is very important. You'll notice a lot of these shaders over here are stuff that you don't have. That's okay, because I have Project Sans imported into my defaults for Maya. I have some extra stuff in here, but you'll still see your Lamberts, Fongs, blends, anisotropics, all that stuff in here. So essentially, what this hypershade window is it's a collection of your different materials in your scene file. So, like, let's say I have um, multiple materials, and don't worry about what I'm doing right now. If I have multiple materials, you'll see them in the scene. I have a blend, Lambert, Lambert 2. This is your default cloud shader, your default shader glow. So this top right window is just showing you the material nodes. So if you click on one, you'll notice that it actually reflects over to the right in our attribute editor that we opened up earlier. And this shows you all of its wonderful attributes. Uh, this work area is something we won't go into comprehensively. This is a way to connect different nodes, modify material sets, etc., and create hierarchy chains, but um, not not too important. I wanted you guys just to be familiar with the Hypershade window itself. There's some cool tools that you don't see the window. Okay, well that's interesting. So apparently, for some reason, my Hypershade window does not appear on the stream. So that's different. Did you guys see the UV editor window when I popped that open? Yes? No? Did you see the UV window? Let's see if it shows you guys the UV texture window. No? Let's see. I'm waiting for my stream to catch up. No, I don't think it does. Huh. Well, that's something we'll have to figure out for streaming. So apparently, for those listening right now, when you're streaming and screen capturing, for some reason it does not show additional windows, which is weird. Apparently, it ghosts them It doesn't show you. So I've popped open a UV texture editor in the Hypershade window, and it doesn't show them. This is experimental class number 1. We're still figuring out some stream settings, so there's going to be technical difficulties for the first couple of classes. This is something we'll have to figure out as far as why it's doing that. Don't really know why it wouldn't be showing you all the windows, so that's fun. But that's okay. The only things I think that didn't pop up are the UV texture editor and Hypershade, right? Only those two? Oh, you guys probably never saw the shelf editor too. Okay. Well, at least you guys know where the Hypershade window is. That's important. You guys know where the UV editor is. That's important. You saw where it was. That's important. Um, oh man, 26. Another screenshot of 2016. Oh, it has a nice little render node. Yeah, Garden. That's what's up right now. There's not much else on the screen right now besides that. Um, I'm looking at the Hypershade of 2016, and it's quite interesting. Um, I don't know if I want to upgrade or not. I think I'm just gonna stay in 2014 and pretend like 2016 doesn't exist. I don't know. I don't know. Ancient, what should I do? Ancient Mall is type A. Ancient Mall and Sylvan are typing. Staying in 1984. Yeah, okay, I'll stay at 2014 then. That's fun. Okay, so that's okay. We know where you guys know where the menus are. Squishy opened them up. That's important. That's good. Okay, so as we're getting close to our 10 o'clock hour, the last few things I think I'm actually going to go over are up here, right above your shelf editor. These are important too, um, as far as things that we'll get into when we start modeling and everything. The first of which is your selection type. So these two are important. This third one, uh, don't worry about too much. I don't ever use it. That's okay. Um, when you have the little box one selected with the sphere in it, this is actually selecting by objects. So this is the standard way of selecting different objects. This one next to it is selection by component type, and we'll get into this when we go into modeling. But component type is where you can find your points, edges, faces, different ways of actually selecting the individual components of objects. You'll notice when I jump from object to object, it allows you to have your different ways of selecting, which is helpful. But this is something we'll get into for modeling. We'll go back to object selection. A lot of these tools up here right now don't affect us. Um, these over here, these magnets, are ways of snapping things. We'll get into different snaps and stuff when we start modeling, but these are where you actually can control your snap movements, which are very helpful for when you're quick modeling and stuff. These last things are rendering things. They don't matter to us, so that's fine. Not a big deal. Um, Other things in the general portion of Maya itself, down on the bottom you have your timeline, which is for animation. This shows you all your different keyframes. Right now it's set to 24 out of 48, so this bar allows you to actually slide between your keyframes. So if you're an animator, this stuff matters. I'm not an animator, I don't animate. I don't ever use this. I don't even know why it's here. I should probably delete it, but I can't. Oh, wow. Yeah, apparently, so in 2016, it's Windows Material Texture Baking Editors Hypershade. Um, that's weird. Yeah, Garden. We'll have to figure out those differences. That's definitely going to be weird because for us, for I guess for anything that's not 2016, it's rendering editors Hypershade. For anyone listening, it's for 2016. It's under Windows Material Texture Baking Editors Hypershade. So it's in a little bit of a different spot. Um, Still the same thing. Once you find it, you'll know where it is. So hopefully people don't have too much of an issue. If you're watching this, for anyone watching the stream that's not here live with us, questions can always be directed to me. I will answer them as quickly as I can. Uh, Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than other times, but I will do the best that I can. Uh, that wraps up our general portion of interfacing with Maya. This gives you just a really, really brief introduction to the components, the main things that are going to matter as far as us um, beginning modeling. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, I'll introduce you guys to one last thing before we close the stream, and that's going to be your radial menu. So your radial menu is something that's really important. You'll use this a lot. I'm going to go back into my just 3D perspective so I don't have a lot of clutter. Turn off my snapping. So if you have your scene open like this, you if you right click, you'll bring up your radial menu, your first radial menu, and you'll see in here you'll have your edge, UV, face, vertex, object mode. This is the stuff we were talking about when we were talking about the editing in different components. So right there's the faces, the edges. These are UVs. This is the vertex points. This is a quick way of doing this. This is really important. This is one of those things that is kind of a speed tool. I use it a lot. Down here you have your materials. Most of the stuff is not that big of a deal. You don't have to worry about it, like paint, color sets, UV sets. That's not important. We'll talk about the different materials and stuff. If you press Control right click, there's another radial menu that'll pop up. This is something we'll get into with modeling. This actually allows you to extend out different functions from the edges and faces, which actually takes you to a different radial menu when you have it selected. So those two things, that quick radial menu is really helpful when you're doing editing and everything in Maya. But don't worry, we'll get into it when we get into modeling. And of course you can't see it. Awesome. That's really stupid. That's okay. You know how to do it. If you guys right click, does the radial menu show up for you? Is what's important. Yes or no? Anyone? Okay, or don't answer. That's fine. If it didn't, apparently, again, this is another thing that didn't show up because apparently this streaming thing is terrible. Um, if you don't see the menu, that's fine, as long as you can right click and still show the radial menu. Um, that's what's important. Um, but the radial menu is something we'll get into more when we get into modeling. With that being said, that's pretty much everything we're going to go over today. We've got other meetings to get to. So again, direct questions to VTA Linden. I'll help you out as much as I can. This stream was very experimental, but we got most of everything that we needed to get across. Um, anyway, that's it. Have a good day.